Hi everyone, Jenny here. I'm going to talk today about my feng shui journey, and it's part two. So, last time I talked about how I met Dr. Zhu and how confused I was about feng shui in general because there's a lot of contradiction out there and it was very confusing. So, I started taking classes from Dr. Zhu, and I had a lot of questions because I read a lot of things. And one of the common things I came across that, I went to design school, so I have a little bit of sense of what works in design and what doesn't work. And one thing that didn't make sense to me was they said when you have a beam on your ceiling and it's kind of jutting out and you can see the beam on your ceiling, and then that means that it's bad and that energy is negative energy and that energy must be removed. And they said one of the cures was that you had to put these bamboo flutes, 2 bamboo flutes, put 2 bamboo flutes. Here we go. And, well, sorry, I'm looking at my phone right now. I don't know if this is the right thing to do. And I can add. And 2 bamboo flutes on the beam itself with red string on it, and that would remove the negative energy. So I asked Dr. Zhu, I said, so does that make sense? I mean, what does that mean? I don't understand how a bamboo flute, 2 bamboo flutes on a beam, can remove the negative energy. I didn't understand this, and I thought it was some kind of Chinese secret. So he looked at me and he said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. And don't believe everything you read, period. So he said the reason why they put these bamboo flutes on this beam is because in Chinese there's a word that was a flute, and that word flute means to cut. And so he says if you put those flutes on the beam, it cuts the negative energy. So it's just a play on words, you know. There's Mary. Hi, Mary. Thanks for watching. So it's really confusing because if you think about it, it's kind of like in English. If you have a play on words, for example, you have the word meat. You have meat as in eating meat, from an animal like meat. And then to meet, you meet people, MEET, you meet people. So it's like if you want to create a space, I'm just using this as a made-up example, okay? If you want to create a space where you want to meet people, it's like putting a piece of meat on your wall. I mean, that makes absolutely no sense, but it's just a play on words. So that's what a lot of the old feng shui that we've read in books is based on. So you want to cut the energy, and if a bamboo flute in Chinese is also the word for cut, they just put that on the beam. So that cut means cut the energy. So it's like, I don't know, if you understand my meat analogy, a lot of it is not truly a cure of energy. So we have to always ask the question, does this make sense or does it not make sense? And we have to ask ourselves that. And the reason why I believe Dr. Zhu so much was because a lot of the feng shui practitioners in olden times, or even today, you don't really know where they're coming from. They just kind of say they learn from this person. And there's not a lot of evidence or explanation on how they became a feng shui master per se. But in the case of Dr. Zhu, it's very, very, very clear. He was an academic, and he studied forestry, and he has a PhD in chemistry from the University of Washington. So, he's a scientist by trade. He taught us, he always questioned it himself. Does this make sense from a scientific point of view? And he would always have a hypothesis. And hey, Kian. And he would have a hypothesis, and then he says, that's how you have to treat everything. You have to treat everything and question it. And you have to ask yourself, does this make sense? And if it makes sense, then that's great. And if it doesn't make sense, then he says, then it doesn't work for you. So a lot of things that we read, especially, on the internet and in books and even on the news now, if it doesn't make sense to us, we have to ask those kind of questions. And the main question in feng shui, I think that we always need to ask ourselves is why? Why? Why do we do these things? Why do we like to have the entrance, for example, in a feng shui house, wide open? We want people to come in. That's why the entry is so important in feng shui, because we want it open and we want to welcome people and people don't feel intimidated. And then in feng shui, fundamentally, it's about creating relationships, good relationships with your family, with your loved ones, with your friends. And that's how we have a much fuller and, happier life, is when we have good relationships with people. That's why our entry is so important. You want to have, things that make people feel like they can come in anytime, they're welcome. And so we don't like to block it. So that's one of the things that we think about quite a bit. So that's my second video here on why and how I started my feng shui journey. So I'm very grateful that I met Dr. Zhu, because he reminded me that, anything I learn, even from him, he always says, ask why. And if it doesn't make sense to you, ask me questions. So I want you to remember that too. If you have something that bothers you in your house and in feng shui that doesn't make sense, ask. And it's okay, and not everything is 100%. A lot of times we think it's not black and white. It's, there's always some kind of gray area. And in one situation, it may work. In another situation, it may not work. It just depends. So we have to think of that in the broader sense of the view. And for example, Dr. Zhu would say something like, okay, this is what we practice. For example, he would say, if we walk around a lake, for example, what kind of energy is that? Is it like yin energy? You go one way, and yang energy is another way. And then to prove his point, he had people go to a lake, and how many are walking clockwise, how many is counterclockwise, and then he said nothing is 100% in this world. People are so. We have to accept nothing is 100%. Some it's 70-30, 80-20, and that's just the way it is. So, okay, let's see. I have people watching. Kian's watching, Maria's watching, and Mary's watching. Everybody, thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, you can type your questions and I'll see if I can answer. So, for me, I think the important question is always when a client, the other day I did a feng shui consultation for a young lady, and she had difficulty placing her desk, because now instead of going to the office, she had to work from home, and she put her desk in her living room. And she's thought, well, where am I going to put it? You got your sofa already, you got your TV there, where are you going to put it? So she put her desk facing outside to her backyard, and then her monitor was in front of her. So she said, so the sun wouldn't get it, so no glare. But in reality, I said, that's really not a great position for you, because what happens is you become very distracted. Instead of looking at your monitor where you should be concentrating, you're looking outside into the backyard. So your concentration isn't focused. So it's better if we turned the desk so it was perpendicular to her window, so she could work and concentrate on her work. And then when she felt like she needed a break, I needed a little clearing, she could turn her head, and by choice, she was looking outside into her yard. And when I followed up with her later, I said, how's it going? And I said, you think you're better? How's your concentration and productivity? She goes, I think so. She wasn't 100% clear, but she says, no, I think I feel better. And she says, I definitely feel better with the wall behind me, instead of, facing the window with my back completely exposed. And she says, maybe I don't look outside the window as much and I'm not as distracted. And that's all it is. It's very, very simple solutions, but those little things can make a big difference. on your energy level, on your concentration level, and ultimately your production level. Okay, I think that's all for today. I'd like to be doing, more questions and answers and, Q&A for people. So please send me your questions and I'd be happy to answer as best as I can. Thanks. Thanks for watching, everybody.